The smell hit me before I even opened the front door. Drywall dust. That sharp, chalky scent that I hadn't encountered outside of a job site in years. I stood on my own porch in Sudbury, Ontario, key in hand, and I knew before I turned the lock that something was deeply wrong inside my house. I had been away for 11 days. A consulting trip to Halifax, the kind of work that still comes my way even at 63, because 40 years of structural engineering leaves its mark, whether you want it to or not. My firm had wound down 3 years ago, but the phone still rings. Old colleagues, insurance companies, municipalities needing a second opinion on a bridge assessment or a heritage building inspection. I don't mind. It keeps me sharp. It gets me out of the house. I wished I had stayed away longer. The door swung open, and I stepped into what used to be my front hallway, and I stopped walking entirely. The wall was gone. Not damaged, not cracked or patched. Gone. The full partition between the main hallway and the living room, the one that ran from the front door to the kitchen archway, had been taken down to the studs, and then past the studs. There was rubble on the floor, chunks of plaster, sections of old lath, a crumbled baseboard I had installed myself in 1987. The floor was covered in a film of white dust that had drifted into every corner of the room. The curtains were gray with it. The bookshelves along the far wall had a fine coat across every spine. My first thought, the engineer's thought, was immediate and cold. Load path. Where does the load go now? My second thought was, where is my stepson? His name is Derek. He is 31 years old, and he has lived in my house, on and off, for the better part of a decade. His mother, my wife Pauline, and I married when Derek was 16. He was a difficult teenager, not cruel, just untethered, the kind of young man who never quite found solid ground beneath him. He dropped out of 2 college programs, worked a series of jobs that never lasted more than a year, and circled back to our house every time something fell apart. I never turned him away. I want to be clear about that. I never once asked him to leave, but I had never come home to find my walls demolished, either. I set my bag down carefully on what remained of the clean floor and walked through the opening where the wall had been. The living room beyond it looked larger, yes, but wrong the way a room looks when something structural has changed, and your body registers it before your brain catches up. The ceiling above the opening had a visible sag, just a few millimeters. Most people would never notice it. I noticed it immediately. "You're back early." I turned. Derek was standing in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, wearing a gray t-shirt with a tear at the collar. He was not apologetic. He was not even particularly surprised. He looked, if anything, slightly annoyed at the inconvenience of my return. "Derek," I said, and I heard my own voice come out very quiet, which is never a good sign for me. "What happened to my wall?" "We opened it up," he said. "Mom wanted more space in the living room. It was her idea." "Where is your mother?" "She went to see Aunt Roseanne. She'll be back Thursday." I looked back at the ceiling, at that sag, at the fine crack running along the plaster from the opening to the corner where the wall had met the ceiling. "Do you know what that wall was?" I asked him. He shrugged. "A wall. That wall," I said slowly, was carrying the load from the bedroom floor above us. It was a bearing partition. It was holding up the second story of this house. He looked at the ceiling, then back at me. "It looks fine." "It looks fine right now," I said. "Tonight, or next week, or next month, it may not look fine. Depending on what you cut, depending on whether you damage the rim joist, depending on what is still connected and what isn't, this ceiling could come down." "You're being dramatic." I did not answer him. I walked to the opening and crouched down and looked at what had been done to the base of the wall. The sole plate had been pried up and removed. The jack studs on either side had been taken out along with the king studs. There was no temporary support beam in place, no post, nothing carrying that load across the span. Whoever had done this, whether it was Derek himself or someone he had hired, had removed a load-bearing partition without installing any substitute support. The floor joists above were now spanning a distance they had never been designed to span alone. The sag I could see in the ceiling was the beginning of a deflection that would continue as long as nothing was done. I stood up. I felt 63 years old in a way I rarely do. "Who did the work?" I asked. "Guy I know," Derek said. "He does renovations." "Does he have a contractor's license?" "He's done lots of jobs." "Does he have a license?" Derek. Silence. "Did anyone pull a permit for this work?" More silence. Then, "Mom said we didn't need one. It's just opening up a wall." I want you to understand something about permits, because this matters. In Ontario, any structural alteration to a house, including the removal of a load-bearing wall, requires a building permit. You submit drawings. An inspector reviews the plan. The work is done. An inspector comes back and signs off. This process exists because load-bearing walls are not decorative elements. They are part of a system, and when you remove one component of a structural system without proper engineering, you risk the integrity of everything connected to it. My wife knew this. She had lived with a structural engineer for 15 years. She had heard me explain, more than once, why our neighbor down the street had to spend $40,000 fixing a renovation that had been done without a permit. She knew she had chosen to go ahead anyway. I spent that evening on the phone. Not with Pauline. Her cell went to voicemail twice, and I did not leave an angry message, because I have learned over the years that angry messages accomplish nothing except to give the other person evidence of your anger. I called a structural engineer colleague of mine in Sudbury, a woman named Frances, who does residential work, and I described what I was looking at. She told me I needed temporary support installed by morning if I wanted to sleep safely in that house. I called a contractor. I trust a man named Al, who has done work on my house twice before, and he came over at 8 o'clock in the evening, and we installed a temporary support beam together, working by lamplight, not speaking much. Al looked at the span when we were done. "Whoever took this out didn't know what they were doing," he said. "No," I said, "they didn't." "You okay, Gordon?" "I will be," I said. That was the first night. Pauline came home Thursday as planned. I met her at the door. I had spent 2 days doing what I always do when something goes wrong. I gathered information. I took photographs. I made notes. I called the City of Sudbury's building department and confirmed, in writing via email, that no permit had been issued for any renovation work at our address in the past 12 months. I contacted Frances and asked her to do a formal assessment of the structural damage and provide a written report with repair estimates. Her estimate came to $31,000. That number was sitting in my coat pocket when Pauline walked through the door. She saw the temporary beam first. Then she saw my face. "Gordon," she said, "before you say anything, how long were you planning this?" I asked. "It was just supposed to be a small change. Derek said his friend could do it for almost nothing, and I've wanted to open up that room for years." "Pauline." I kept my voice even. That was a bearing partition. She blinked. "Derek said it wasn't. Derek is not a structural engineer. I am. And I am telling you that the wall you had removed was carrying the floor load from our bedroom. There is currently a temporary beam in place that Al and I installed because otherwise this house was not safe to sleep in. Frances has completed a structural assessment. The repair cost is $31,000. I watched her face move through several expressions. Surprise, then defensiveness, then something that looked almost like irritation. "That seems very high," she said. "It is what it is. The cost of doing the work properly. Well, maybe we can find someone cheaper." I looked at her for a long moment. "Pauline, a load-bearing wall was removed from our house without a permit, without engineering review, without any temporary support. The ceiling is showing deflection. If I had not come home when I did and installed that beam, we could be looking at a partial collapse. This is not a negotiation about finding a cheaper contractor. You always make everything sound catastrophic. I had been a structural engineer for 40 years. I had assessed buildings after floods, after fires, after foundation failures. I had written reports that resulted in buildings being condemned and people being evacuated. I did not make things sound catastrophic for dramatic effect. I called things as they were. I left the kitchen and went upstairs, and I sat in my office for a long time. The thing about a marriage is that you can love someone genuinely and still find, eventually, that you have been seeing the relationship differently than they have. Pauline and I had been happy, I believe that. I don't say it out of bitterness. But in the days that followed, as we tried to talk through what had happened, something became clear to me that I think had been true for longer than I wanted to admit. She had planned this renovation, knowing I would object. She had waited until I was out of the province. She had not asked me. She had told Derek's friend to go ahead. And she had given Derek authority over my house, the house I had bought in 1981, 20 years before I met her, the house I had renovated with my own hands over 4 decades without a conversation, without a question, without a single word to me. And when I confronted her about it, Her first instinct was to negotiate the repair cost. I thought about the comment my daughter from my first marriage had made once, years ago, quietly. "Dad, she always calls it her house when she's talking to Derek. Have you noticed that?" I had noticed. I had told myself it didn't mean anything. I asked Pauline directly, "Did you know the wall was load-bearing?" A pause. Derek said it probably wasn't. "I'm asking what you knew. You have lived with me for 15 years. You know what a bearing wall is. Did you know?" She looked out the window. "I thought you were being too precious about the house." There it was. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A deliberate choice made because she had decided that my concerns would be an obstacle, and so she had routed around me entirely. I asked her to cover half the repair cost. She said she didn't think that was fair since she hadn't known the full extent of the damage. I asked her who had authorized the work. She said it was a joint decision between her and Derek. I asked her to show me the permit. She couldn't, because there wasn't one. And when I asked whether Derek's friend had any licensing or insurance that might cover the damage, she said she didn't know. $31,000. No permit, no licensed contractor, no structural review, and she didn't think she should pay half. I need to be honest about what the next few weeks were like. They were not dramatic in the way that fights in marriages are sometimes portrayed. No shouting, no thrown objects, no ultimatums delivered in doorways. It was quieter than that and, in some ways, harder. We were two people in their 60s, sitting at a kitchen table in a house with a temporary support beam where a wall used to be, trying to figure out what we were to each other. I paid for the repairs myself. Al and Francis supervised the work. A proper engineer-stamped design was submitted to the city. A permit was issued retrospectively after the structural assessment confirmed the repair plan. A licensed contractor installed a flush beam with proper bearing posts. An inspector came and signed off. The ceiling was patched and repainted. The floor was refinished. It took 6 weeks, and it cost slightly more than the estimate, as these things always do. During those 6 weeks, Derek moved out. He didn't say much when he left. He took his things from the spare room and loaded them into a truck belonging to one of his friends, and he nodded at me in the hallway on his way out, and I nodded back. I have no hatred for Derek. I want to be clear about that too. He is a young man who has struggled, and he grew up without a father who was present, and I think he learned somewhere along the way that rules were things that applied to other people. That's not entirely his fault, but he is 31 years old. At some point, the circumstances of your childhood stop being the explanation and start being the excuse, and I think Derek has been living in that gap for a while. The harder conversation was with Pauline. We tried, for about 3 months after the repairs were done, to find our way back to what we'd had. We went to a counselor twice. The counselor was kind and professional, and in the second session she asked Pauline a question I had been wanting to ask for weeks. When you made the decision to renovate, what did Gordon's opinion mean to you in that moment? Pauline thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "I suppose I thought he would get over it." The counselor said, "And now?" Pauline looked at the floor. "I don't think it was just about the wall." She was right about that. We separated formally in the spring. The house was mine before the marriage, and it remained mine after that part, at least, was uncomplicated. Pauline moved into an apartment in the south end of the city. We have spoken a handful of times since then. The conversations are not unfriendly. They are the conversations of two people who meant well and chose badly, and who have run out of runway for fixing it. The house stands. I am sitting in it right now, in the study I rebuilt after the repairs, with the bookshelves back on the wall and the floor refinished to a shade close enough to the original that only I can tell the difference. The ceiling is solid. There is no sag, no crack, no sign of what happened except in my memory. I am 63 years old, and I have been an engineer for 40 of those years. And the thing I have learned, the thing I keep coming back to, is that structures fail in predictable ways. They don't fail all at once. They fail incrementally, load by load, stress by stress, until one day the thing that was holding everything up is no longer there, and the ceiling begins to descend, and by then it is very late to be asking why nobody said anything. Houses are honest that way. They show you exactly where the weaknesses are, if you know how to look. Marriages are not always so straightforward, but I think, if you look closely enough, the signs are usually there. A wall removed without permission is just a wall. But when someone who loves you or says they do decides that your objections are an inconvenience to be routed around, decides that your expertise is an obstacle rather than a gift, decides that what you built and what you value can be altered without your knowledge, while you're 800 kilometers away, that is not a renovation. That is a statement about how much of the load you've actually been carrying, and how long you've been the only one who knew it. I am not bitter about how things ended. Bitterness is a luxury I decided a long time ago I couldn't afford. But I will tell you this, and I mean it for anyone who is in a situation where someone in your household, a stepchild, a sibling, a spouse's family member has taken action inside your home, on your property, with your belongings, without your knowledge or consent. That action is not a small thing. It is not a lapse in communication. It is an expression of how they see you, and how much they believe they need to consider you. Pay attention to that, not with anger, but with clarity. Respect is not given because you demand it, but it also cannot survive being ignored indefinitely. A load-bearing wall, once removed without proper support, can take down a great deal more than anyone intended. And some repairs, the structural ones, the ones in the bones of the building, have to be done properly, or not at all. There is no shortcut. There is no cheaper contractor who will make the math work differently. You either do it right, or you live with a ceiling that is slowly coming down. I chose to do it right. It cost me more than I expected. It was worth every dollar. If anyone reading this is dealing with something similar, a family member who has crossed a line in your home, a partner who has made decisions about your life without including you, a situation where you are being told that your reasonable concern is an overreaction, I want you to know that you are allowed to take it seriously. You are allowed to require that things be done properly. You are allowed to say, "This is my house, and these are my walls, and I built this, and it matters." Take care of your structures, the ones in your house and the ones in your life. They're worth more than you think.